Beat your breasts for the pleasant fields, for the fruitful vine, for the soil of my people, growing up in thorns and briars. Hello everybody, this is Gilgamesh, and today we are on Isaiah chapter 32. We're going to take it from verse 9 through the end of the chapter, and this is the second part of this chapter. Verses 1 through 8 sort of form their own poem, and here we come in with a brand new idea and some interesting imagery here. We start off here in verse 9 with an interesting address to women. We say, "You women who are at ease, rise up, hear my voice. You complacent daughters, give ear to my speech." This female audience is addressed both because it is these women of Jerusalem who have been egregiously leading a self-satisfied life of luxury, and this was referenced back in Isaiah chapter 3, very famous chapter of Isaiah where he talks about the daughters of Zion and their comeuppance that would happen with them. But also it is women who have a obligation in society to take a role in the public keening in a time of disaster. And this is about a disaster which is to come, and so he's calling upon the women to take on their public mourning duties, which that was in their society an important role of women, was to do that type of keening or mourning in public in very important and showy sort of ways. There are two words for women here. The first is nashim, which is the standard plural for women. And then after that it says banot, which is daughters. Some have thought that this is trying to reference married women and unmarried women. There's not a lot of real backing behind that distinction. I think that it's just simply synonyms for each other. With the previous chapter 3, these women were referred to as daughters as well, and I mentioned then that this is probably to evoke a certain emotional attachment. Women, and particularly daughters, are things that we protect, things that we are defensive about, and so seeing them in a moment of distress brings a natural emotional response, which is part of what Isaiah is going for in his poetry here. I should note here that this term rise up doesn't look like it belongs, and some have suggested that maybe that word was added later and should be deleted because it doesn't quite match the meter of the verse here. But it's hard to say such things. It's pretty easy to get into just editing the text willy-nilly when there's not any real textual backing to it. But some would say that that rise up doesn't work as well, and it makes a nicer parallel if we have, "You women who are at ease, hear my voice. You complacent daughters, give ear to my speech." That makes a nice, tighter bit of poetry. The extra verb in there, to stand up or to rise up, might not really belong, but such things are difficult to say. Moving on to verse 10. "In little more than a year you will shudder, complacent ones, for the grape harvest ends. The ingathering will not come. Tremble, at ease ones. Quake, my complacent ones. Strip and make yourselves bare and tie around your waist." So we have here, we've replaced the complacent women, the women who are at ease and the complacent daughters with just simply the words that describe them here, the complacent ones and the at ease ones. They've just got a participle here that's in place of the actual word for women. So it's understood at this point that these are women, but we're no longer making that distinction. We're just simply referring to them as complacent ones and at ease ones. We're saying here to strip and make yourself bare and tie around your waist. This is not having in mind here the idea of true nakedness or anything like that. It's talking about more of putting off the fine clothing and putting on something rather simple. It does not say in this verse anything about sackcloth. It's not clear at all what they're tying around themselves. But sackcloth would make sense, and other verses that are phrased similar to this seem to include the idea that this is sackcloth. But it never really says what's being tied around here. There is a similar usage to this found in Yoel chapter 1, verse 13. And that seems to be a good analog for what we're talking about in this verse. Now, I should note that this idea of tying about your loins, or to get all King Jamesy on it, to gird up your loins or tie about your waist, this is sometimes a metaphor of preparing for battle, or maybe even preparing for wrestling or running. To gird up one's loins, they hadn't really invented pants yet, and so men dressed in these long flowing robes, if you wanted to fight, you needed your legs free from getting tangled up in such things, and so you would tie up your longer skirts and robes around your waist so that you had your legs free to move. And this was a typical thing for warriors or runners or wrestlers to do, so that their legs would be free to do such activities. We see examples of this, such as Elijah, when he's going to run alongside a horse, he ties up his skirts so that he can run properly. So that's one meaning of it. The other meaning of it is to sometimes tie on weapons, which nobody invented pants, so belts weren't really what belts are thought of now. Belts were to tie things onto you, like a sword or tools. That's what you had belts for, was to add accoutrements to your body. And so girding up your loins sometimes was a matter of putting on weaponry. And so there's a lot of military idea of this thing, but I don't think that's what's happening here. Here in this one, we are talking about putting on simple clothing, which would be indicative of mourning or wailing. And so he's saying to put off all the finery, which he goes into in some detail in chapter 3, and put on simple clothing here, indicative of mourning. So he's not asking them to be truly naked or anything like that. He's just simply saying get rid of all the fancy clothes and put on something simple, much like the verse in Yoel 1:13 says to do, when that's talking about a disaster happening. Now, there are a series of imperative verbs here in this this little section here. And oddly, they all seem to be masculine singular verbs, which is quite odd. And because we're addressing here what appears to be multiple women. And so we would expect a feminine plural imperative. Well, the first verse in verse 11 is a verb that means to tremble, and it is actually a masculine plural. Then we have quake, which is a masculine singular. Then we have strip, make bare, and tie, all of which are masculine singular imperatives, but they have a paragogic hey on the end, which isn't uncommon, but it is notable. It's not the simple and most standard form of the masculine singular imperative. Now, one thought that people have come up with is maybe this isn't using the Hebrew pattern at all, but is using an Aramaic pattern. Aramaic is a language that would come in much greater popularity during the Babylonian captivity. If that's the case, then the hey at the end for these masculine plurals would actually make these feminine plural verbs, feminine plural imperative verbs. And the first verb in there that is a masculine plural would be assumed to be a scribal error. But something is wrong with these 5 verbs here, and it's a matter of some speculation as to how to fix them. It seems like they all should match in the form that they're in, but we are speculating a bit here. Are we addressing these women as men, and why would we do that? It might be a nod to the prophet actually addressing the entire city, which is only symbolically personified as a woman or as women. And that might be what happens here, is that while the symbolism is them as the women of the city or the daughters of the city, he's really talking to everybody. And so as he moves on in the poetry here, he just goes to the masculine plural or the masculine singular because he's really talking to everybody, and you kind of default to masculine when you do that. It's one possibility here. The other possibility is if this is a reflection of Aramaic grammar that's being used here, it would indicate that there is a later editor, possibly a later composer, we don't really know, but that somebody edited this at a much later point in time, well after the lifetime of the traditional Isaiah. And then what do we make of the two odd verbs? Looking at other translations that are ancient, it was generally understood that all these verbs should be feminine. And that's part of why there is some belief that maybe this is an Aramaic grammar that's being used here, because we have other ancient translations like the Greek Septuagint and the Syriac that seem to indicate that all of these should be feminine verbs. But here they are oddly masculine, even though we are referring to women. It's just one of those fun things as you get to learn Hebrew that not everything follows the neat rules that the grammar books say. And what is it that is happening to these women? We're talking about an ending of their agricultural prosperity. The grape harvest is going to come to an end. The ingathering of grapes isn't going to happen. And so we have here mourning because the agricultural world is going to fall apart around them. And we come here then to verse 12, the reaction to this, and we have a lovely sort of three-part reaction here. Beat your breasts for the pleasant fields, for the fruitful vine, for the soil of my people, growing up in thorns and briars. Beating the breast. This is a gesture of mourning. The Hebrew participle is a masculine plural, where it should be a feminine. This is part of what we discussed in the last verse there. One idea of why this might be is that the word for breasts is a masculine plural, and so it might have influenced the verb associated with it, although that's not what is supposed to happen in the grammar, but it is a continuation of the oddness of the female versus male verbs. Then we have this interesting thing about thorns and briars. It says here, kots shamir, and there's no conjunction between those. It's not thorns and briars, it's thorn briars. At least that's how it is in the text that we've received. But it's generally agreed that there should be a conjunction here, and there's some, again, ancient translations that seem to support that there should be a conjunction between these two words. But what are the thorns and the briars about? These are things that, again, we have come up, and they're going to infest these once fruitful fields. They are a symbol that Isaiah loves coming back to. So we're going to go on a side quest here. I want to look at everywhere in Isaiah where we talk about these thorns and briars. And I will note that this is itself an unusual one here. We have several words that are kind of translated as thorns and briars, and most of them we don't actually know exactly what kind of plant it was, or how they differentiated from each other, and the meaning of the plant that it was may have changed over time as well. So it's really hard to pin this down to specific plants we're talking about, but there are multiple words here for thorns and briars and thorn-like things that are in Isaiah, and they seem to be some sort of an important symbol that he's using. They are something that makes people afraid. It stops people from traveling near them. They fight against God, and they're singled out for burning, and they will eventually be replaced with good plants. So, a guide to the thorns in Isaiah. There are 6 words for thorn or briar or thistle, that kind of an idea in Isaiah. The one that we have in this verse here is kots. It is only in Isaiah here in chapter 32:13, and also in 33:12 it shows up. So 2 places it shows up. And it mentions that they're going to be burned in 33:12. This is also one of the words that is used in Genesis 3. So outside of Isaiah, this word does appear, and it appears particularly in Genesis 3 when we talk about that thorns and thistles will infest the ground after the fall of man. This is one of the words there. It's kots. And it's paired here with the word shamir. Now, shamir is a word that is used only in Isaiah. Does not occur anywhere outside of Isaiah. It shows up in Isaiah 5:6, in chapter 7, 23 through 25, in chapter 9, 17, in chapter 10, 17, in chapter 27, 4, and here in 32, 13. He uses it a lot, all in the first half of his book, but he uses it a lot. There is a homonym to this word that is used 3 times outside of Isaiah, but it's clearly not the same word. That word clearly means some kind of a rock, whereas in Isaiah, the word clearly is a plant. So while there is a homonym that shows up 3 times, the actual word here for a thorny, obnoxious plant only shows up in Isaiah, and it shows up several times. Now, when this word shamir shows up, it is almost always paired with the word shayit. And this shows up, shayit shows up in 5:6, in 7:23 through 25, in 9:17, in 10:17, and in 27:4. And this word also is only used in Isaiah. So these 2 words are Isaiah unique. Everywhere that shayit shows up, it is paired with shamir. And the only time that shamir shows up and isn't with shayit is here in this verse. So this is the only time we have shamir without it being followed with shayit, and here instead it's coupled with the word kots. So that's those 2 words, and we don't really have a lot of information on what they mean, but they are exclusive to Isaiah. There is also the word seer. Seer shows up a couple of chapters from now in 34 verse 13, and it is listed as one of the thorns that will come up in palaces and fortresses. Then we have the word na'atsuts, which shows up back in chapter 7, verse 19, and will show up at the end of Isaiah in chapter 55, 13, and that is another Isaiah-exclusive word. Nobody else uses this word but Isaiah. And then we have the final word here is sirpad, and this shows up only once, and it shows up in Isaiah 55, 13. So what do these things say when they show up? Well, starting in order here and going through the book of Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 5, verse 6, we are told that thorns will overrun the vineyard. This is the song of the vineyard here, and we're told that thorns are going to take it over. Then we go on to chapter 7, verse 19, and we are told that the thorns will provide a resting place for the Assyrian invaders. So these thorns are somehow allied with the Assyrians that are charging into the land. Then we have later in chapter 7, verses 23 through 25, we have the very odd statement, and this is one of the statements that really made me feel there was much more to this than meets the eye. Men are going to come with arrows and bows because of the thorns, and they will be afraid. Now, I lived in Arizona for many years, and Arizona has some of the meanest plants in the world that you will ever find. There are plants there that can, throw thorns at you from a distance. But I have never seen anyone attack a plant with a bow and arrow or feel that that was what was needed. So this is a very interesting thing. The thorns are going to be something that we need to attack with arrows and bows. And we're going to be afraid of them and won't go into their territory because of the danger of the thorns. This does make it seem like we are not talking about plants here, but that the plants are being used as a symbol for something else. Then in chapter 9, verse 17, I'm going to go change. Okay, I'm back. I got to learn not to film right at sunset. As we come into chapter 9, verse 17 here, we have the idea that wickedness will burn the thorns. Their own wickedness is going to cause them to catch fire. Then we move on to chapter 10, verse 17. We have the light of the Holy One will burn the thorns. We then move on to chapter 27, verse 4, and we have briars and thorns are battling the Lord in his vineyard, and he will go through and burn them. Then we have later, where we're at now, chapter 32, verse 13, thorns are going to come up in the pleasant field and in the houses of joy. Then next chapter, 33:12, the people are compared to thorns that are going to be burned in the fire. Then next chapter after that, 34:13, thorns are going to come up in the palaces and the fortresses. And then finally, towards the end of the book of Isaiah, we have 55:13, where the thorns get replaced with good plants, with the fir and the myrtle or hadass tree, from which we get the name Hadassah. The fir and the myrtle tree are going to be those who will be for the Lord a name and a sign. So these are special plants that, again, are not just plants. We're using them to represent people. They are going to replace the thorns, these good covenant-keeping people. So when we look at the whole reality of this, thorns are something that are a result of the fall of man. They aid the Assyrian adversary. They fight the Lord. They frighten mankind. They infiltrate the most joyous and safe places. They take over the city when the city falls. They are allied with the demons of the waste places. Something that we often see here as the city falls too is that the various types of demons dance and make homes in the ruins. And these thorns are there working with them. And these thorns will be sent for burning eventually, and they will eventually be replaced with covenant-keeping people. So what are they? I don't know. But those are a lot of good clues that Isaiah really meant something symbolic with these. And are they referencing evil men who are following some secret evil plan? Do they represent in his mind evil spirits? Are they both? Is there a difference between those two things? They're clearly some sort of a force for evil, and Isaiah clearly means not just simply plants. He is using them, as he often does, as symbols for people. He does this with various kinds of trees. Both prideful and righteous people are often compared to trees. He does this with several items in nature, but he does like using plants as symbols, and I think this is a very important symbol for him, and one that should be noted how often it shows up in his writing, and there seems to be a bit of a consistent theme around it. So I wanted to point that out. Now back to the chapter. So we're talking here about that the thorns and briars are going to grow up on the soil of the people. We're beating our breasts because of the agricultural failure, the fields, the vines, the soil itself, and being turned over to these thorns and briars. And we're told more things that we're beating our breasts for here probably. For all the joyous houses, the exultant town, for the tower neglected, the roaring city abandoned. The Ophel and the Bachan will become dens forever, a joy of wild donkeys, a pasture of flocks. So we had these joyous houses, this raucous city, this exultant town. The word means kind of like roaring, a tumultuous city. Towers that were built that are now neglected. And the idea here that the city is just abandoned. We have here the Ophel and the Bachan. These are likely references to specific parts of Jerusalem. The Ophel is the land adjoining the Jebusite city with the Palace of Solomon and the temple area, or alternatively, it could mean the whole area, including the temple and all of its outbuildings, presumably also the area with the houses of everyone who is anyway connected with the ritual of the temple. The Bachan is a word that we only have here, but it is thought to be a specific large watchtower that was in the Ophel, and it might be the same large tower that is mentioned in Nehemiah 3:27. So these are specific areas of the temple compound and maybe one of the important structures in that area that are going to become dens forever. The word dens here indicates obviously dens of animals, that people have been abandoned and taken out of here, and so these will now be the inhabitants of animals. Isaiah is talking about a Jerusalem that has fallen and has been emptied out. This is a horrifying prophecy because, yes, Jerusalem, the mighty city, will fall and the people will be moved out of it, and it will be left as a joy of wild donkeys and a pasture of flocks. The word joy here, for joy of wild donkeys, it is the same word that we had just a moment, just at the top of this here, for all the joyous houses. And so this is a reflection back of that the joyful houses are going to become the joy of wild donkeys. Now, the word for flocks here is an interesting one. It's probably the wrong word. This is yet another case where a resh and a dalet, an R and a D in Hebrew, are mixed up because in Hebrew they look very similar. We've run into this many times in the past. They aren't exactly confused here in the same way as we often see it where a R is replaced with a D, but instead actually they're right next to each other in the word and it looks like they swapped places. So somebody did a little bit of dyslexia here and flipped the order. And so what is happening here is the word that is written in the text is Adarim. And that is what's in the traditional text there, means flocks, basically. And instead of Adarim, we are proposing that it should be Aradim. The R and the D are swapped in there. And that would be another word that is a synonym that also means wild donkeys. So if that's the case, then there are two words here that are different words in Hebrew, but are basically synonyms that both refer to wild donkeys. So a joy of wild donkeys, a pasture or feeding ground of wild donkeys. Job 39:5 uses both of these words that mean wild ass or wild donkey in parallel with each other. The lexicon tells me that the scientific name is Asinus hemipus. So there you go. That's apparently what kind of donkeys these are. So the houses of joy have become the joy of these wild donkeys, and they are now what inhabits the city. The idea is it's abandoned and it's left to wild animals, which is another reason why flocks doesn't make sense here, because we're not talking about people feeding their flocks here. We're talking about that the people are gone, and what should be here should be wild animals. Then we change here in verse 15 and we pivot. So we've established that the city is destroyed and abandoned. In 15 it says, until the Spirit is poured upon us from on high, and the desert becomes Carmel, and the Carmel is deemed a forest. Then will dwell in the desert justice, and righteousness in the Carmel abide. And the making of righteousness will be peace, and the work of righteousness, quietness and trust forever. My people will abide in a habitation of peace, in secure dwellings, and in easy resting places. And it will hail when the forest falls down, and the city will be utterly laid low. There's a lot of interesting repetition of words in this. And I don't know exactly how to put it together in any pattern that's really a common pattern here. It's clear that the repetition is intentional, but it doesn't follow all of that need of rules, except for verse 16, which is clearly a chiasm in how it's structured. But we look here at a couple of things. First, the word Carmel. Some translations put this in as a fruitful field, and that is what it means. It means an orchard, basically, a fruit field, a field of fruit trees. So the Carmel is an orchard, but it is also a very specific region that is near Haifa in Israel. And so that's sort of like the ideal orchard. And so there is a place that is the Carmel, and there is also the general word Carmel, which means an orchard. So it's saying here the desert is going to become an orchard, and the orchard is going to become a forest. This is generally understood to mean that everything's going to become better, that the desert and the orchards are going to become better than they were before. That an orchard apparently is one step below being a full forest. And we have here in the chiasm below it the words justice and righteousness, which are two of Isaiah's favorite words here, that they are going to dwell or abide in specifically the desert and the Carmel. That justice and righteousness will be there. And then we have the word righteousness repeated twice in verse 17. I kind of wonder if one of those words should be justice and not righteousness, that maybe there was an error there, but we'll leave it as it is. And the making of righteousness will be peace, shalom. And the work of righteousness will be trust and quietness forever. Well, this word for trust is repeated down below in how they describe the dwellings. We don't really say in English the trust dwellings, but so we came up with something similar, the secure dwellings. Maybe we could have changed the other one. Work of righteousness is quietness and security forever. That would work. That would work. Then you could have them actually reflect each other. So on the fly translation here for you. So the work of righteousness, quietness, and security forever, and my people will abide in secure dwellings. Those two obviously reflect each other. The word for easy resting places here actually connects back to the women who are at ease from the opening of this back in verse 9. But interesting also is this verse 19. And it will hail when the forest falls down, and the city will be utterly laid low. Well, the word for hail is this verb barad, and we think it's wrong. Instead of barad, what if the verb was yarad? There are a couple of Hebrew manuscripts and two ancient translations that actually support it being yarad rather than barad. Yarad is a verb that means to go down. And it's actually the verb that follows it there when it says that the coming down or the falling down of the forest. And so if we were to change this with one letter here from barad to yarad, it would give us a translation something like, and he will go down in the going down of the forest, and she will be made low in the making low of the city. Now, the he and she pronouns here refer to the forest and the city respectively, because forest is masculine and city is feminine. They're both nouns, and so they're the antecedents of those pronouns. So the forest will go down in the going down of the forest, and the city will be made low in the making low of the city. In Hebrew, it is quite common to use two verbal forms from the exact same verb together when you want to convey certainty. So in English, we would usually not put both these verbs in there, but we would translate it something as, so the forest will certainly go down, and the city will certainly be made low. Those are perfectly fine translations, but I'm just trying to give you an idea of what the actual wording is doing in Hebrew here. They repeat the verb basically twice to show that certainty. And if you change barad to hail, to yarad, you get that in the first line, and then you get it in the second line, and the two lines are very nicely parallel when you do that. But wait, there's more. The word for city and the word for forest are quite similar to each other. Not in that they share any kind of commonality in their root, but they're spelled very similar. There's just two letters that are swapped. That's the whole difference between the two words. So when we look at the word for city and the word for forest, we notice that they're very visually the same. And if you swap the order of those two letters, then it gains even more parallel and symmetry between the lines. That probably makes the reading of Yarad correct in this, that these two lines were intended to be very similar to each other, and that this is a bit of a play on words here between forest and city. But then we come to the idea of, so what does this mean? We've just talked about all this great restoration and how the people are going to be in a peaceful habitation, secure dwellings. And then we're talking about that the forest will certainly fall down and the city will be utterly laid low, or certainly laid low. Well, it looks to me like this verse might be misplaced. because we are seeming to talk about the positive restoration in this portion, and this clearly is a bit of doom that is mentioned in this verse, that the forest is going to fall and the city is going to be laid low. I think this verse may have gotten misplaced. It would make a lot more sense if it occurred maybe just before verse 15 or maybe just before verse 14. It would make a lot more sense in those locations. And verses sometimes do get misplaced like that as copyist errors. It does seem to break the flow here, especially since what follows it is more on the positive restoration theme and not coming back to the idea of the downfall of the city. So it seems like this should go back to the section that is talking about the city falling down. But it is two very interesting parallel lines here that have a lot of similarities that don't really show themselves in translation that easily. But then coming to our final couplet here at the end, coming back to the idea of the restoration imagery, happy are you who sow beside all waters, who let the feet of the ox and the donkey range free. Now notice this is a domesticated donkey here in this one. But this is talking about a restoration of the agricultural life, people that plant crops alongside well-watered areas that have oxen and donkeys that can just go out and graze because the land is back to its beautiful restoration. So again, verse 19, somewhat out of place in the middle of all this, but the people are going to abide in these habitations of peace with secure dwellings and easy resting places, that their righteousness is going to cause peace and quietness and trust, and that their life will be restored. And all of this is going to happen when the Spirit is poured out from on high. So Isaiah in this is talking about the doom of Jerusalem, which will be left abandoned. But then he turns it around and talks about how the Spirit will be poured down and that things will be restored, and the beauty and splendor of Jerusalem is going to come back in this idyllic agricultural setting where they have crops and water and livestock and everything is as it should be, with justice and righteousness restored. And so that's chapter 32. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe, leave me a comment, ring the bell, give me some hype. I don't know. Whatever it is that YouTube decides that you need to do. But hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, shalom.